Imagine waking up one morning and without warning, every dark chosen one across the planet is gone. Vanished. No trace. No warning. No goodbye. Just an overwhelming, eerie stillness where their presence once stood. At first, you may not notice anything unusual. The sun still rises. The news still runs. The world keeps pushing forward in its usual chaotic rhythm. But then something subtle starts to shift, something invisible, yet undeniable. The air feels heavier. The silence feels louder. The people around you begin to spiral in ways you can't explain. The energy of the world itself begins to unravel at the seams. Because what most people don't realize is that the dark chosen ones were never here to be seen, they were here to hold. They are the silent anchors, the spiritual stabilizers, the ones who walk through the muck of humanity's shadow and transmute it day after day, not for recognition, but because it's encoded in their soul. They don't speak in love and light slogans. They don't wear white robes or float above the ground. They're the ones who sit in the dark with those who are breaking, who enter the spaces others are too afraid to touch. They carry the weight most people avoid. They feel everything, and they alchemize it, sometimes through grief, sometimes through rage, often through complete isolation. But they do it, and they do it quietly, without applause, without followers, without needing to be understood. Now imagine all of them gone. What happens to the balance? You might believe the world would simply adjust, that others would rise to take their place. But it doesn't work like that. Because dark chosen ones aren't replaceable. They're not a role you can apply for. They're forged. They're born through fire, through lifetimes of spiritual warfare, through deep soul contracts made long before this incarnation. Their presence on Earth acts like a pressure valve. They absorb, transmute, and stabilize energies that would otherwise erupt into collective chaos. They walk through society like undercover agents of balance. You may not recognize them, but they're the reason the world hasn't completely collapsed under the weight of its own unconsciousness. So when they disappear, a vacuum forms, not just energetically, but spiritually. Unseen forces begin to stir. Entities that have long been held at bay start to move more freely. Collective shadows, those massive, unprocessed traumas of humanity, begin to rise to the surface like a volcano that's been capped too long. People start acting out. Old patterns intensify. Addictions spike. Relationships fracture. Mental health plummets. And no one can quite explain why. They'll blame politics, the economy, the climate. But deep down in the marrow of their being, they'll feel it. Something is missing.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Because what the dark chosen ones really did was hold the line. Not with brute force, but with presence. With awareness. With the kind of spiritual gravity that pulls distortion into truth just by existing. When a dark chosen one walks into a room, shadows tremble not because they're being fought, but because they're being seen. That kind of seeing is rare. And it's terrifying to anything that feeds on fear, illusion, or deception. Without that presence, illusions run wild, lies become louder, and the collective consciousness begins to fragment. Let me ask you something no one ever dares to ask. What part of you would unravel if the world's last truth-tellers vanished? Not the loud ones, not the preachers. I'm talking about the ones who hold it down in the quiet, who sit with their own darkness so they can help others walk through theirs. If they were gone, would you still know how to face your shadow? Would you still be able to tell what's real from what's programmed? Would you even recognize your soul's voice beneath the noise? Because that's another thing the dark chosen ones do. They keep the spiritual signal clear. They don't broadcast it. They hold it like a tuning fork of truth. When you're around them, you remember things. You remember who you are. You remember what really matters. They don't need to say much. Their existence is the transmission. So when they vanish, that signal gets scrambled. People begin to forget. Not just forget who the chosen ones were, but forget themselves. Forget their mission. Forget their sovereignty. That's the real danger. Not te chaos. Not the entities, but the amnesia. And here's the part that will shake you. Many dark chosen ones have already considered disappearing. Not physically, but energetically. Pulling their presence back. Going invisible. 1979. Letting the world feel what it's like without them. Because they're tired. Not just tired in the way you feel after a long day. They're soul tired. tired of carrying the weight of collective ignorance, tired of being misunderstood, tired of being attacked for simply existing in truth. They've been fighting a spiritual war with no medals, no recognition, and no reinforcements. And some of them are done. They've already started pulling their energy away, retreating into silence, letting the world feel the void. And that's the wake-up call. Because once they're gone, it's too late to ask them to come back. You don't realize what they were doing until they stop doing it. You don't feel their weight until it's no longer holding your world together. That's the paradox of the dark chosen ones. They're invisible until they're missing. And by then, the damage has already begun. When the dark chosen ones disappear, the collapse doesn't begin with buildings falling or nations crumbling. It begins in the unseen. It begins in the realm of spirit, in the collective frequency of humanity's emotional and energetic field. The first sign isn't war. It's disconnection. A deep, unexplainable sense of unease that ripples through the hearts of people who don't even know why they're feeling it. It's a silent panic that starts to spread, not loud enough to be newsworthy, but deep enough to disturb sleep, to fuel anxiety, to trigger breakdowns in the fabric of relationships, trust, and inner peace. We all feel it when the spiritual anchors are pulled out. But we don't always have the language for it. The world becomes louder but less meaningful. It's harder to hear your intuition. It's harder to make decisions. People begin to spiral in their own minds, overthinking, overreacting, becoming more reactive, more tribal, more desperate for external validation. The spiritual noise becomes deafening, and without the presence of the dark, chosen ones holding the signal, many forget what clarity even feels like. You see, these quiet, intense, often misunderstood souls were never just here to help. They were keys. They were holding energetic codes that grounded massive amounts of unresolved trauma, not just their own, but collective trauma passed down for centuries. Their nervous systems were like spiritual lightning rods, absorbing and diffusing chaos before it could erupt into mass dysfunction. When they vanish, that energy has nowhere to go. It builds. It festers. It explodes in the most mundane and terrifying ways. And that's when the collective shadow takes center stage. We begin to see the world acting out its deepest wounds. Not symbolically, but literally. Old ideologies come back with new faces. Ancient fears rise under modern disguises. People lose their ability to discern truth from manipulation. Because the ones who used to walk among them quietly whispering, "This is false. This is not you. This is your pain," speaking, they're no longer there to reflect the truth. And when truth loses its mirror, distortion becomes the new law. Think about how many times you've been on the edge of something breaking down, giving up, falling into a spiral, and then out of nowhere, someone who hardly fit the mold showed up. Someone strange, intense, maybe even uncomfortable to be around. But they said just one sentence. Or they just looked at you in a way that made you stop, made you breathe, made you remember. That was a dark, chosen one. They didn't save you. They reminded you. And that's what they were doing for the world, every single day, without anyone knowing. Now imagine billions of those reminders suddenly gone. Let me ask you something that might shake you. If no one was left to remind you who you are, who would you become? Not who you wish to be. Who would you default into? That version of you, reactive, lost, hungry for validation, is the version that the world becomes when the chosen ones are no longer present. And it's not because people are evil. It's because they were never taught how to hold their own shadows. The chosen ones were doing it for them. Not to enable them, but to buy them time. Time to wake up. Time to learn. Time to remember. And that time is running out. You see, the disappearance of the dark chosen ones isn't just hypothetical. It's already happening. They're not dying. They're withdrawing. Spiritually. Energetically. Silently. They're watching the world scream over distractions while ignoring the real war, a war for consciousness. A war for memory. A war for soul. And they're wondering, is it worth it to stay? Because they've given lifetimes. They've broken curses. They've walked through fire. And many of them have done it alone. While others mocked them, feared them, labeled them broken, negative, or too much. And now they're asking, if the world doesn't want what I carry, why should I keep carrying it for them? This is not a guilt trip. This is reckoning. A moment to ask yourself, who have I ignored, dismissed, or feared because their truth was too uncomfortable? Was it someone in your family? A friend? a stranger online. Or maybe it was you. Maybe there's a dark, chosen one living inside of you that you've been avoiding. Because claiming that part of you means owning the weight, the responsibility, the fire that comes with it. But if you don't claim it and they all leave, what happens next? The collapse isn't a punishment. It's a consequence. When the world silences the truth long enough, the truth stops speaking. And when the truth stops speaking, the shadows speak louder. And then everything begins to fall. The world has always misunderstood darkness. We were taught from the beginning to fear it, to run from it, to label it evil without ever stepping into it long enough to understand its purpose. But what if I told you that the darkness, true darkness, was never the enemy? What if it was a sacred container? A womb? A crucible? A place where transformation could happen when no light could reach. And now that the dark chosen ones are gone, humanity is finally being forced to face what they were holding all this time. And it's terrifying. Because nobody wants to admit that darkness holds everything we've refused to process. Every wound, every betrayal, every generational trauma, every piece of truth that didn't fit the narrative. The dark chosen ones didn't fear that space. They went into it willingly. Because they knew something most people don't. You can't kill what you won't confront, and you can't heal what you won't hold. So they held it, for themselves, for their bloodlines, for the collective. They walked into the caves everyone else avoided and made homes there, not because they loved pain, but because they knew that inside the pain was power. And now that they've vanished, the caves are empty, but the pain is still there, unprocessed, unattended, and it's rising. Without the ones who knew how to hold the darkness, the collective is being swallowed by it. Slowly, subtly, but inevitably. You see it in the way people can't be still anymore, can't be alone, can't face themselves without numbing. You see it in the rise of collective anxiety, in the constant outrage cycles, in the desperate need to be seen, heard, validated by anything or anyone. Because without the chosen ones holding the weight, people are being forced to feel the very things they've spent lifetimes avoiding. And it's overwhelming them. The truth is, the darkness was never the threat. The unwillingness to face it was. The chosen ones weren't here to scare you. They were here to teach you, to show you how to descend into yourself without being devoured, to show you that your rage could be sacred, that your grief could be holy, that your shadow wasn't proof of your brokenness but a map to your power. And now that they're gone, humanity is left with the map but no guides. And the journey through the dark without a guide is where most people lose themselves. Have you ever sat still long enough to hear what your pain is actually saying? Not distracting yourself, not performing healing. I mean listening, letting it speak, letting it show you what it's been carrying for generations. That's what the dark chosen ones did every day. They weren't just healing themselves, they were decoding ancient frequencies of suffering that had never been named. They were translating the language of the void. That's why they felt heavy. That's why they looked tired. Because they were doing work that was invisible to most, but essential to all. And now that they're gone, the question becomes, will you step into what they left behind? Not with ego. Not to replace them, but to remember what they were modeling, what they were embodying. Because the time has come where no one else is coming to hold it for you. The grief is yours now. The rage is yours. The shadow is yours. The transformation is now in your hands, and the only way out is in. But many are afraid, terrified even, because facing what the chosen ones held means facing the full weight of what's been denied. It means acknowledging the systems built on suppression, the families built on silence, the identities built on masks. It means breaking, and then choosing to rebuild without the lies. That's why so many are still avoiding it. Because once you see through the illusion, you can't go back. And without the chosen ones leading the way, the path feels impossible to walk. But here's the deeper truth. The disappearance of the chosen ones was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to initiate you, to force you into remembrance, to awaken the part of you that knows how to hold the dark, that knows how to transmute pain into poetry, wounds into wisdom, endings into rebirth. The chosen ones never wanted followers. They wanted mirrors. They wanted you to see yourself in them, not the persona, but the essence. The part of you that came here to do more than survive. The part of you that came here to transform. So now, as the darkness rises and the world trembles under the weight of what's been hidden, you have a choice. You can numb, you can run, you can wait for someone else to come and save you. Or you can become what they were, not by copying them, but by remembering who you were before the world told you to be afraid of your own depth. Because what the chosen ones held is now waiting for you to hold. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the outer world stops making sense. When everything you were taught to believe about safety, success, identity, even spirituality starts to crack. And in those moments you're left with one terrifying truth. No one is coming to save you. Not the gurus, not the Jia, not the systems, not even the dark chosen ones. Especially now, because they're gone. And for the first time in perhaps thousands of years, the world is left alone, staring into the void. But here's the secret the chosen ones always knew. You were never supposed to be saved. You were meant to awaken, to ignite, to become the flame in the void. The disappearance of the chosen ones wasn't a punishment, it was a passing of the torch. But instead of handing it to you, they left it burning in the dark. You have to find it for yourself. And that's the part most people resist. Because we've been conditioned to think that spiritual power comes from lineage, from permission, from someone above us telling us we're ready. But real power doesn't ask for permission. It remembers. It rises from within. It breaks through the illusion of hierarchy and says, I am here now. I'm not waiting anymore. You, reading this, listening to this, feeling this in your bones, you're not here by accident. That stirring in your chest, that resonance in your gut, that's not just inspiration. That's recognition. A cellular knowing that something ancient and powerful is being activated. Not because you've earned it, because you've remembered it. The world isn't falling apart because it's doomed. It's falling apart because it needs new anchors, new holders, new flames. And you are one of them. But you can't become the flame without facing your own void. That's the part most people try to skip. They want the power without the descent, the clarity without the collapse. But the chosen ones didn't become who they were through light alone. They became who they were by walking through their own darkness again and again until nothing could control them anymore. Until the void became home. And now it's your turn. Not to mimic their path, but to walk your own. To descend into the places within you that still tremble, that still doubt, that still hide, because that's where your fire is buried. Not in your perfection, in your rawness. So what does it mean to become the flame in the void? It means you stop outsourcing your intuition. You stop waiting for signs and start listening to the signal already pulsing through your soul. It means you stop asking, "Am I ready?" and start saying, "I am willing." It means you stop fearing your own depth and start using it as a compass. Every trigger, every shadow, every heartbreak, it's all fuel. Not to burn others, but to illuminate yourself. You are the lantern now. You are the guide. And the world is watching not for your success, but for your authenticity. Because we don't need more light workers reciting love and light mantras. We need truth holders. We need people who can stand in the middle of chaos and not flinch. People who aren't afraid to cry, scream, break open and then rise, still holding the truth in their hands. Because that's what the chosen ones were. And now that's what you're becoming. The world forgot it needed this kind of power. It forgot how sacred rage can be, how holy grief is, how silence can be louder than sermons. But you didn't forget, not really. You just buried it under survival, under programming, under the fear of being too much. And now the flame is calling, not to consume you, but to reveal you. So here's the final question, one only your soul can answer. Will you become what the world forgot it needed? Not for glory, not for approval, but because something ancient in you knows it's time. Time to stop hiding. Time to reclaim your role. Time to become the very thing they thought they erased when the chosen ones disappeared. The truth is, they didn't disappear. They passed the flame. And now it's in your hands. Hold it well. And burn.